Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head. And in this episode, I'm talking to Russell Van Brocklen. He's the founder of Dyslexia Classes, which is focused on teaching students to overcome challenges using research from Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Say-Swartz and Writing Strategies for Struggling Writers by James Collins. He has also put all this research into a program that's been funded by the New York State Senate. As always, I'll put links to all Russell's programs and other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Russell.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So, one thing that piqued my interest when I was skimming through your profile as a bit of research for this podcast is that you went to the University of Buffalo and studied Neurological Communications. You clearly had an interest in how neurology works from back at sort of grad school level. What kind of drew you into that particular course?
Well, it happened when I applied for the New York State Assembly internship in 1997. I had an evaluation done by Dr. Halichka, who is a SUNY Distinguished Professor in Psychology, or basically the best they had.
Okay.
And when I applied for the internship, I sent the evaluation over, and it kind of caused a bit of a ruckus because they didn't know what to do with me. So literally the speaker's office, the majority leader's office got in contact, and they formed a committee, and they decided to place me in more of a graduate internship and the program and counsel's office that ran the assembly day to day, because there are 3 administrative assistants that could help with my writing. So they could edit things and help out. And then they recrafted everything so I could have a good internship. Well, the political science department at SUNY Center of Buffalo said, they basically gave me a big go to heck, because they said, we don't agree with these accommodations. You got 15 credits of F.
Right.
So, yeah, well, you can imagine what that does to a GPA. So I decided at that point, enough's enough. Nobody else is going through this. So I created a program that would solve dyslexia for adults. And what we essentially found is around this time, there was a groundbreaking book that came out called Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Say-Swartz.
Yes.
It clearly showed the back part of our brain has virtually no neural activity. The gen ed student, the non-impaired brain is going crazy. But the front part of our brain had about 3 times the neural activity. And the first word there was articulation. So I said, okay. I went and I talked to successful dyslexic professors, and I found a theme. They were not very good in high school, a little better in college, but day one of graduate school, they owned the place. So I said, okay, articulation, grad school, we're good. Let's go and how do we do this with writing? Because that's how we're judged. And I said, let's take the graduate records exam, analytical writing assessment, and let's get high school students. And it also works easier with older students, but we wanted to start with high school students. And let's get them to get in the average range from wherever they started.
Okay.
And that took about 9 years, because I had to come up with a process. I had to have it evaluated by senior professors in Buffalo. It went through the Senate Majority Leader's office, and I had to get the approval from both the New York State Education Department and the SUNY Research Foundation, which I got. And so what the program did is we tried it out on our first student. Her name was Michaela. She had an 8th grade writing skill. She scored in the 0 percentile on the GRE writing assessment. And after just a few months of instruction, we had her writing reevaluated, and she was at the 50th percentile of undergraduate students. And her spelling and grammar, which were basically the word was used, disgusting pre-test, were clean at the graduate level. But absolutely clean at the graduate level. So it's self-corrected. So when we eventually had the program put into public schools, the teacher said she spent almost no time on spelling and grammar. It auto-corrected. So how do we do that? The front part of our brain is 3 times overactive and deals with articulation and word analysis. And in this program, we focus primarily on articulation. For our more basic programs, we start off with word analysis. But the problem with those is they take a lot more time. So this was designed for high school and college students and working professionals just to solve their writing problem in ways that they need to express it as quickly as possible. So essentially what it is, it's very simple. We start off with it's heavily templated. So we start off with a thesis statement, and we ask dyslexic adults to go in and find out what the primary opinion is. Here's the fascinating thing we found. I was working with a gentleman who received an MBA from Columbia University and did quite well there. And I said, okay, here's one paragraph. What's the primary argument? Took him almost a minute to figure out. I could go into any high school advanced placement English class, and they would tell me in a fraction of a second what it is. Well, after he practiced it dozens of times, he got very quick at it. Then we moved on to the first body paragraph, and we showed him a transition, and then we asked, these are the arguments given. Why does the argument not support this ridiculous opinion? And we had him point out several points, and then we showed them how to construct it into a paragraph. And then we practiced that a lot of repetition, so that by the time we got done, when the dyslexic adult would read the prompt, the essay would essentially pop into their head. So we may read slower, we may write slower, but we can process information vastly faster than our gen ed peers. And as you progress in your education, especially when you get into graduate school or professional employment, the ability to process information at a fraction of the time it takes our gen ed peers makes all the difference. So how did this help me? I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. So third case in contracts, I decided to audit property and contracts. The professor, he gave us a case, and then he picked on me, and I started arguing with him, and I could just see it in my mind, all the different policy considerations. I knew where he was going, and we argued for 10 or 15 minutes until he said he couldn't be any more correct. He had to go on to the next case. I decided not to go into law because I couldn't keep up with the writing aspect.
Yeah,
but people that I was there with, when they graduated, they still couldn't do what I did in my third case. Mm-hmm. The ability to process so much faster. So we take advantage of that, so that once you're done, the essay essentially just flies into your head. And what we found is when those students went on to college, they all graduated from a top 100 college in the United States, and they said they used no accommodations, and they were just fine in their classes with grades between 2.5 to 3.6. So by focusing on our strengths and what we need to do, that essentially solved our writing concern. Now, when it came to reading, this was something I found very interesting. It just so happened to be just by taking courses. I was taking a post-war Japanese history class in Tokyo.
Oh, blimey, way. How did you end up in Tokyo?
I just decided, I took Japanese karate from Master Ochiai, who was one of the top traditional Japanese masters, and I was fascinated about the culture. I said, I want to go to Tokyo for a semester.
Well, why not? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a great experience, but she came in at the last minute because our other instructor was pregnant and couldn't do it. Okay. So she was she was getting her PhD at Harvard, and she said, okay, I'm going to teach this the way I would at Harvard. Well, the first essay we were granted was from Professor Dower, who won the who taught at MIT, won the Pulitzer and the National Book Award. I thought it was the easiest thing I practically ever read in my life. Nobody else could read it. I'm like, this is weird. So over the years, I would take that essay to like Harvard, Cornell, Princeton, Yale, and I found out over half the students couldn't comprehend even the first paragraph.
Okay.
And they were supposed to be able to read this in 10th or 11th grade.
Yeah, so Ivy League students, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, but these were very hardworking students. These weren't the lazy ones. I specifically asked professors for students that worked very hard. And what I simply found is it was extraordinarily dense material.
Yeah.
He would say more in a paragraph than some people did in books. So I crafted a process of dividing the reading material into 4 separate parts and having students, after they finish my writing program, go through, and in the first section, they would try to read it 4 times, looking for any information based on each of the key parts that I gave them. Look for this information. And then as we progressed in different sections, by the end, they're looking for all 4.
Okay.
Then I would ask them, now just go ahead and write, for each section, write 5 paragraphs to show that you understand. And then what they found is, after going through those 2 processes, which are as quick as we can, because when you're talking about working professionals with dyslexia, you don't have the time to put into this as you did as a student.
No, you don't.
As they went through,
I agree with you on that one.
As they went through, now they could write at least the average range of a person applying to graduate school, which was good enough, and that they could read what they needed to understand. Okay, it was no longer a problem for them. So by going through those 2 courses, that solved their reading and writing. Now, there is a way of breaking it down, going slower, making it easier to pick up the steps. But what I found when I was dealing with professionals is I just don't have the time.
No.
So, like when I was teaching this, as I said to the gentleman who had an MBA from Columbia, he was putting in 60 hours a week. And he said, how much time do I need to put in? I said, well, there's a certain amount of material we go through. And once you understand it, you'll go through it very quickly, but it's a lot of repetition. You tell me how much time you have per week, and you just will go through it at your own pace. And at the conclusion, his reading and writing improved astonishingly. It was no longer an issue for him.
Yeah. So before we get heavily into the sort of technical details of the program, because I really want to find out about that, but I'd like to find out a little bit more about you first, because you're dyslexic yourself, and I read in your bio that you're struggling with dyslexia since a young age. So how did you come across the fact you were dyslexic? What was the story behind you finding out?
I was, at the end of 2nd grade, I was told that I needed to go into special ed.
Yes.
Where at that time in New York State in the late 70s, it was worthless. When I was in 7th grade, I decided I wanted out. So my best my best class was always history. And I happened to have a school board member across the street. So just, how things work in the States, every local school is run by elected board members, and they have a lot of power of what happens in the district.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So they told the special ed department I was out for history for 8th grade. I was told I was going to fail. Nothing was going to work for me. So I ended up getting the history award. I had 100 on every test except for one where I mistook a B for a D. So, but besides that, I had 100 on every test.
Yeah.
So then I wanted out for everything. So I forced my way out in 9th grade, taking all college prep. And I started off with an 86 average first semester. And my 4th quarter, I was at 95.5, which was 4th in my class. So that's how I forced my way out. But it was always a bunch of tricks.
Really?
My native reading and writing skill is at the 1st grade level.
Yeah. Okay.
And I have to go through a process to shift where I process information from a part of my brain that works to it doesn't work to part that does work. And then I'm at the graduate level, and it can go back and forth. It's a really annoying. I read in colors. So by the
really?
time,
okay.
Yes, I picked up a box of crayons when I was in 3rd grade, and I started learning to read in colors. Dr. Holichka never understood how I was able to do it. She said, I'm not going to put the time into it. But when I was asked to create these things for other people, given that I already did this myself, I was able to do that. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I've been asked to create the ideas on how to take, for example, for children, those kids who are writing a bunch of randomly placed misspelled words. Mm-hmm. How do we correct that? And I was asked, well, you did it with the older students. How do we do it for the younger kids? Well, that took 10 years. But here's a very simple process on how to do that. So just in case you have any parents of young kids writing where they can't even write a basic sentence yet, here's how we fix it. It's so simple.
Go on.
So what we'll do is we're going to start off with if you look at Overcoming Dyslexia, second edition, page 78, figure 23, the front part of our brain's 3 times overactive. We're going to start off with word analysis. Okay. Yeah. So here it is. We're going to have the kid type with his fingers. No iPhone, no iPad, no handwriting, typing on a real keyboard, laptop or a desktop. Yeah. So he's going to type out hero +, what are we talking about? So let's have you come up with, I want you to imagine a dyslexic kid that you know. Give me a name. You can make it up, but give me a name.
Oh, don't be like that, because I'll give you a silly name from a childhood cartoon. Let's go for Bert. We're going on this theme.
Burke. Okay, yeah. Burke. Okay,
Bert.
So we exchange hero for Burke. Burke +, what are we talking about? Now, what does Burke love to do? What's his passion?
What does Bert love to do? He loves to come out with his friends and cause mischief.
Okay, give me a word.
Mischief.
Mischief. Okay. So we're going to exchange that. So we got Burke +, what are we talking about? Burke + mischief.
Okay. Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask you a very specific question that I do at major dyslexia conferences, and almost no teachers answer it correctly. So try to follow the exact exact question I'm asking. Okay. Yeah, here's the exact question. Yep. Does Burke like or dislike mischief?
He likes it.
Okay. Now exchange the + for that word. What's the 3-word sentence?
Bert likes mischief.
But that's not what I asked. I asked, does Burke like or dislike mischief? You automatically added the S.
Yes, I did. Yes.
He doesn't know how to add the S.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we get Burke to add the S? And Orton Gillingham's the primary way dyslexics are taught in the States. Takes weeks to learn how to do this. Okay. It's very complicated. Or any other process, it's very complicated. We're about to make it really simple.
Go on.
So here's the assumption. Burke speaks proper English. Okay? So then we'll ask him, Burke, read what you just wrote out loud and answer this question. Does it sound generally correct? Because he wrote Burke like mischief. Yeah. What's his answer going to be? Does it sound generally correct? Yes or no?
No. Because it
doesn't.
Odd because you're missing.
It's weird. There's like this weird feeling.
The rhythm of it doesn't sound right, does it?
Exactly. So we just say, Burke, fix it. So he writes, Burke likes mischief.
Yes.
For those students, we have a course where we go through that about 100 times, and at the end, you will have. We exchange likes for a more advanced word. So let's take with Burke. What's something he absolutely detests?
Let's go
something he can't.
Broccoli.
Broccoli. Okay. So instead of dislike, Burke dislikes broccoli. Burke loathes broccoli.
Mm-hmm.
So we do the word analysis first, and then we add because, and we go up to 3 reasons, starting off with 1 reason, then 2, then 3. And the key thing is we tell Burke before you finish, you don't drop the period. You can ask us any questions and we'll answer them. But once you put the period down, if there's a spelling mistake or maybe grammar mistake, you have to rewrite the whole thing. Okay?
Interesting. Okay.
And eventually, you're going to find that Burke's making the same mistakes over and over again. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these kids will just be period droppers. So then eventually, they're going to get really frustrated with themselves. Then they're going to focus intensely. I'm not going to make this mistake. And that's where the magic happens.
Oh,
so okay. As they're going through that process, I've had teachers and parents say, I have this kid writing a bunch of essentially randomly placed misspelled words. After we go through that process, we'll have Burke loathes broccoli because it tastes bad, it looks disgusting, and he would rather be playing video games. And they'll write a sentence like that.
Sounds reasonable.
Well, that's after generally about 100 sentences. Okay.
Blimey. Okay.
And that may take a couple of weeks to go through, but because they're hyper focusing, okay, and that's, as I said, that's where the magic happens. And they're so sick of retyping. By the time you get done with 100 sentences, if you're not done, you still have some problems, we do another 100. I never had a student need more than 400 sentences, which may seem ridiculous, but this is a middle school kid who couldn't write a basic sentence when he was 13.
Right, I see. Okay, yes. So actually it's a lot of sentences, but their level is kind of low to begin with in terms of their
right. Well,
sentences.
That particular student went to writing. We showed them how to write a basic 5-paragraph essay, to an intermediate 5-paragraph essay, to our more advanced high school. He did all that within about 2 years. In our more advanced process now, what I got back from, if let's say you're in high school, college, or graduate school as somebody with dyslexia.
Yes.
Primarily, the teachers came back, and I'm just going to use Romeo and Juliet, for example. Okay. So I know in England, I take your top students or A-levels.
Yes, that's it. Yep.
So let's say you have a bunch of A-level students, and they're all writing the same thing about Romeo and Juliet. They've been writing the same essay for the past 100, 200 years. The teacher, imagine reading 20, 30 essays of the same thing.
Yeah.
All right. So what they wanted was, how do we come up with something original? So here's part of our program on doing that. The first thing we do is we have the student pick the book, or they're going to read the whole book or a section of the book. I'm just using Romeo and Juliet because everybody knows about it. Yep. So we have you pick a section. That's what most people do. And you need to go through and identify all the minor characters. Okay, we're staying away from the major ones. It's kind of like a sandbox. You want a sandbox that's the least played in. All right, so you find a minor character, and then you read it through the section first time just to reacquaint yourself, or to go through it the first time. The second read through, you find your minor characters. And then the third read through, you're trying to find a critical subplot that deals with that minor character. But if you pulled the subplot out, it wouldn't affect the overarching theme of the story.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you have more than one option, you pick the way you want to go. And in our course on that process, what we do is we show you how to narrow it down to a specific universal theme. And then we ask, did your teacher or your professor ever contemplate that universal theme with that minor character at that subplot point? And if the answer is no, you have it, then we show you how to craft the essay. So when the teacher reads it, they've learned something original. And we use artificial intelligence at critical points in there, so that the reason why we have you read it through 3 times is, a lot of times artificial intelligence will come back with nonsense. And you have to explain to the artificial intelligence why that's nonsense and correct it. And then have it do your grunt work for you. Now, for graduate students, at that point, I'll just say, just have artificial intelligence do the whole thing for you, because you don't have a lot of time. And as they go through it, they will come up with something that's worth a discussion point in their graduate class, something original that's worth a couple of minutes of a discussion, but they can come up with that in about 20 minutes.
Oh, cool.
So, and when you're out as for adults, if you wish to go through that process, it's essentially what we call closing the knowledge gap. And you can take that process and apply it to your field and come up with something original, which is the currency of the realm in our modern day, professional work. You come up with something original that can save a company $500,000, $2 million, $10 million. You kind of got the boss's attention.
Yeah, they're kind of quite keen on that kind of stuff.
And that's what we do. And then we finish up in that series of courses with a book called The Craft of Research, which is from the University of Chicago. It was written by professors at the University of Chicago decades ago because their doctoral students didn't know how to write. But this is how, in the States, government wants you to be able to write, non-government organizations, professional, consultants. This is how they want you to write. And we show you how to take that knowledge gap that you've solved, and then we show you how to write using the craft of research principles. And it just makes the professors and bosses much happier with people that know how to do that.
Yeah. So you were mentioning when you were talking about your own dyslexia story that you use a lot of tricks to get your reading up from a grade 1 level to a grade level and back again. What sort of things are you deploying? I'm kind of curious about the way you see the inside of your head and how that kind of works and how you manage to push things around. It feels like a very visual thing you're describing to me, and I want to kind of solidify the picture.
So when you're looking at that, I like to go back to the research. There's a book written in 97 by Professor James Collins called Strategies for Struggling Writers.
Yep.
And I find it works well for reading as well. So he found that there were 3 default strategies called copying, visualization, and narrative.
Yeah.
Okay. So just because, as I said, what I use, nobody else can use because I read in colors. But to give you an example for reading, I worked with a 10-year-old student named Casey. She had a 2nd grade reading level, and she was phenomenally interested in Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah. So I assigned her a book called The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, which is 10th grade to college level, first year college level, and about 1,000 pages.
Okay.
And she's reading at the 2nd grade level. It took her 6 months, and now she's reading just fine. So what I found for most adults, if you can read a book like that, you're good. Mm-hmm. So what we do there is it's a very simple process. We use a concept called writing to read. So what I'll have somebody do is, and this will solve your reading problem, just, my background. Because of this and other reading programs, I've been a reviewer for reading programs at the biggest dyslexia conference in North America for the past 3 years.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, well, it's the highest honor you're going to get in North America. So I was very happy to do that. Yeah. So what we do is we have you pick out something in your speciality. Your speciality is your area of extreme interest and ability. So for Casey, it was Theodore Roosevelt. So what we would have her do is she would get an audio book and she'd follow along in the main book. So so for you, for example, just to understand the base causes of this, I want you to think about something in your speciality, okay? Your area of extreme interest and ability. Have you found in that speciality, do you have ideas flying around your head at light speed, but with little to no organization?
Yes, can do. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so basically how we need to fix that is to force your brain to organize itself through using writing as a measurable output.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is very profound. It seems simple, but it's very profound. So I kind of want you to think about it's kind of like a train. There's a curve coming up, and we're thinking so fast. It's like a train going at 300 miles an hour. We're going off the track all the time.
Yeah.
So our primary problem with dyslexia is its lack of organization in that front part of our head that's massively overactive. So what we do is we force our brain to organize itself, but we need writing. It's a measurable output. Okay. So what we'll do is I'll first have you listen. We go paragraph by paragraph. You listen to the paragraph. Okay. And as you're listening to the paragraph, you're also trying to follow along in the book, okay? And then you're trying to ask yourself a very specific question. Identify the hero, and then ask, what is the hero trying to accomplish? So you're doing 3 things at one time. You're listening to the audiobook, which, by the way, you can speed up or slow down. I recommend slowing down, not speeding up.
Okay.
You're following along in the book, okay? And then you're asking yourself, what does the hero want to do? And essentially what that does is it takes the ideas that are flying around your head and it just makes that chaos. It drops about 70, 80%.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And then if you find a word that you cannot read, you don't absolutely know that word, then you go to open up a Word document or something similar. You type out the word. Then you go to Merriam-Webster's or Oxford English Dictionary, pick out your definition, and then you type out the definition.
Oh,
so you type out the word and the definition. And you do that for everything in that paragraph. Okay? Now, that's going to take you a while. Now, if you're 10, if you can imagine Casey, she had to do this practically with every word. But by the time she finished with the first the first chapter, now the next chapter was much easier. Mm-hmm. So she was sitting down for 6 months, 2 to 3 hours a night, 5 to 7 nights a week, just doing this on her own. I saw her for 15 minutes a week because that's what her parents could afford. Yeah. 6 months later, she's done with the book. And now she's in 11 and she's in 6th grade. They're sitting in a study hall and she's reading this, big, thick book. And everybody else is reading like Harry Potter. And they came over and her classmates looked at her book and took it, started talking to her about it. They couldn't get past the first paragraph. I get a call from her teacher saying, I thought this kid had severe dyslexia. She's writing at the 2nd grade level, reading at the 2nd grade level. Now she's reading this college level book. What's going on? And I told her, Mom, well, what do you think she's been doing in her room all night for the past 6 months? That's it. Okay. Now I prefer teaching reading by writing first, the way I initially taught. So I find that far more efficient. But some people just want to go and read. That's how you do it. And once you can read 1,000-page book at the, something designed for 16 to 18-year-olds, most people find that's good enough for where they need to be. If you need something more advanced, pick up something more advanced in your speciality and go through the process.
Okay. How did you tweak all that for the fact you read in colors rather than regular?
Well, it's kind of like my solution for dyslexia is kind of like a Tesla, and the solutions that I'm giving you are kind of like Model T technology.
Right.
Much more simplified. So what I found when Dr. Holichka, I went back for a second evaluation and she said I had the worst case she's ever seen.
Okay.
Most people aren't anywhere near severe as I am, so they don't need to use the tricks that I used. Okay. So that simple process, if you go through that and you're willing to put in the time and the effort, remember I said I would prefer writing where you write to read, where it just, like, for example, when I have students going through beyond that, those basic sentences I was telling you about, for a simple sentence, we use the process of a hero, universal theme, and villain. So we find a hero. We ask what the hero wants to do. You're going to write anywhere from a sentence to 5+ paragraphs, depending on your level.
Yeah.
We're going to ask for an action word, which moves the hero towards the direction they want to go. The most important word, if you write multiple paragraphs, we just knock them down to 1 each. You decide which way you want to go. That's our base universal theme. Then I have you go into thesaurus.com. And what we start off with, that's a very broad definition. When we look it up in Oxford English or Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and what we want is something much more specific that's in your head. So you go through each word that the source spits back to you, and that's anywhere from a couple to 50. And for adults, this is just the time it takes. You write out the word, each word, and its definition that you choose from Oxford English or Merriam-Webster's, not cutting and pasting, you're typing it out. Mm-hmm. And you do that, and then you find the better word, and then we click on that, we go down a level, and we keep repeating until the final level, they're junk words. And then the last one, that's our universal theme. Then we go up, and based on the hero and our universal theme, we try to pick an optimum villain to prevent the hero from doing what they want to accomplish. Yeah. And that's a person or a concept. I teach that to 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
As you get older, you can learn it much faster. But as you go through that, imagine how many times you have to take a word, type it out, and type out its definition until you know it. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then as you build it takes a couple of months. As you build up that vocabulary, now you have a much richer, much more diverse vocabulary. Now when you go to learn to read, it just happens so much faster because you really know these words now. So those are two different ways of how would we go about solving our reading issue. I prefer the second, but some told me I just want to learn to read. Okay, the first process that I told you works as well.
Okay. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're reading, or you can go to a Dr. Orton-based approach, which in the States cost $50,000 to $80,000, and they're using a process created in the 1940s through the 1950s, and it takes a number of years. But it works if you have the money to spend on a house. That's the way of doing it.
Right. Yes. I could see that being prohibitive.
Yes, but just so you know, in America, if you're wealthy, if you're Bill Gates, they're going to send their kids to an Orton-based school.
Fair enough. Yeah, I could see that. Okay, so how did you start at the University of Buffalo, you're doing your Neurological Communications, you dive in the research program. At what point did you stumble across the Overcoming Dyslexia book? And what really grabbed you?
Right when it came out.
Oh, yeah.
That was
sort of on top of it already.
It came out, and just so everybody knows, like with Dr. Orton, he was worldwide. He was the founder of how to start things off. He had a guess because he passed away in 1948. His subsequent ideas, he was generally more right than wrong. But until this came out, we didn't know.
No.
Now we have the hard science, the brain scans, where I differ than everybody else in the community is, I present at major conferences all the time. I'm a reviewer for major organizations. But my ideas are radically different because they think we should take the back part of the dyslexic brain and increase the neural activity.
Right, yes.
All right. To me, that's kind of like, I'm just going to use American basketball as an example. It's kind of like, imagine Michael Jordan in college. Should we give him a hockey stick or a basketball? Why are we fighting this?
Definitely don't give him a baseball.
Well, yeah, and you just showed that didn't work out too good in comparison to basketball. So why are we focusing on our weaknesses instead of our strengths? I thought that was ridiculous. So by doing that, by focus on word analysis followed by articulation, or in our initial program, articulation at the graduate level, we're focusing on our strengths. But also, if you want to take a slower time period, by focusing on our speciality, our extreme area of interest and ability. There, I'm sure you've had classes that you didn't like in school where it was so hard just to keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
Okay. The problem with our educational system is it's designed for gen ed students. So they want us to become well-rounded individuals before we specialize. We just want to specialize. So if we focus in our area of extreme interest and ability, like for example, with Casey, Theodore Roosevelt, she jumped 8 grade levels in 6 months. Okay. Mm-hmm. As a girl who was only 10 or 11, she's a child, but she decided to act like an adult and put in the time. All right. I've never heard of any private school that could come in anywhere close with that level of increase. And this process was so simple. What do we spend that 15 minutes on each week? Well, I was a college cheerleader. She was joined the cheerleading team. We'd spend half the time talking about cheerleading. And then she asked me a couple of questions to clarify what she was doing. And then she went back at it. Okay. So by playing in our area of extreme interest and ability, we can concentrate on that all day with no problem.
Yes.
And
yes.
We overcome our deficit until we're at, I prefer, above grade level. And then we send the dyslexic students back and they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
But why fight what we're good at? This clearly shows when you got, here's another example I like to give to this. Imagine a high school Arnold Schwarzenegger and the proverbial 98-pound weakling. And let's say none of them weightlifted before, we put them on a weightlifting curriculum. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to outperform the 98-pound weakling.
I would agree with you on that one, yeah.
This is what we're good at. Mm. Why fight it?
Yes.
And so what I tell, especially parents, we pull the kids out. We have this intervention, which we can get through. Like I train parents to do this all the time. We show them how to get at or above grade level, and then we put them back in, and the students are okay.
Yeah.
And for the students the students in our original program, these would be our A-level type students. These are kids that should have been fighting to be valedictorian, but they're writing years behind. They're writing as if they're 13 and when they're 17. By bringing their writing skills up to the graduate level, they're entering graduate level, they went back and they found, we have persuasive writing. We have this type of writing. They could just apply what they've learned to everything. They didn't need to be taught. They could just do it.
Yes, you're sort of using these specific interests as a sort of Trojan horse to get the skills down, so then you can roll it out to a more general kind of education.
Exactly. And what we found is when those kids went on to college, they all refused any accommodation. No accommodations. Okay. They just took advantage of what other kids had. They took their tests like everybody else. And in the States, dyslexic college students normally get a separate room, double time, all this other stuff. And when they all graduated with grades between 2.5 and 3.6, remember the school district didn't spend as much time on this as we wanted, but under $900 for the whole thing. I think the state got a return on their investment.
Yeah. Sounds like a reasonable return on investment compared to what you said for other programs. So we were talking earlier on about adults and how you tailor the program differently to adults, because that's a heavy lift, isn't it? Doing sort of 3 hours of writing dictionary definitions out for. No,
that's why we go for adults that are professionals. I just say we're just going to go through the original program. Okay.
I see.
The difference between that is we're not going to work in your speciality. I'm just going to tell you what we're going to work on. And the GRE is going to give you things across everything you had in college. Okay. And you're not going to like it. It's not fun. And then when I tell them for the reading program, we're doing post-war Japanese history. Why? Because I thought it was a joke and nobody else could read it. Okay. I'm going to show you how to, one of the things that I do when I teach reading teachers is I'll give them the pretest for the GRE. And there's a mistake that the first student, she couldn't get it. Dr. Holichka picked that argument because nobody gets it. She didn't want you to get it. And when I give that to people who are business people, they go through and they can't find the mistake until I tell them. Then they're like, we should have gotten that. And I said, word analysis. Then we go through the first paragraph of post-war Japanese history. The key is word analysis. They can't even tell me, these are people with MBAs from, some of them Ivy League schools, and they can't read it. They can't understand it because it's too dense. So what I tell the adults is we're going to go through these two programs. If you need both or just the writing, we'll go through the one. It'll get you there faster than anything else out there, but you're not going to enjoy the experience. And they tell me,
right.
I try to tell them how bad I think it is. And they come back and say, listen, it wasn't fun, but it's not as bad as you said, because I deal with the worst stuff in the office every day. Okay. But the whole point of that program was to have your spelling, grammar, it was to have it auto-corrected. We go on to the reading if you just want to make sure that you can read appropriately. And before you know it, in a matter of months, you're done and you're fine.
Yeah. Happy for the rest of your life, in theory.
Well, you're not going to have a problem with your writing for the rest of your life. And for people who have questions on that, I have a lot of documentation from Dr. Holichka who followed this through, and they can review it, ask questions. I've spent endless amount of time talking to PhDs about it because it can't be that simple. I say, yeah, it is. I solved dyslexia. It's not that hard once you understand what the issues are and then how to overcome them. It's not that difficult.
Yeah. One thing I noticed that come up quite a bit in some of your profile was building confidence. Now, there seems to be a sort of fair bit of the pillar to it that you are quite keen on building people's confidence. Is that more to do with the confidence being low so much at school, you got to build that back up before you start hitting them heavy, or how do you see that kind of piece?
Well, I don't know about you, but when I was in school, my nickname was stupid, retard, words that I can't say on the podcast.
Yes.
But along those flavors, does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So I found that does one of two things to students. They either become so motivated that they don't care. They just did the work. Like I want you to recall back when you were in college. Engineering, the way you were taking, there's a lot of work associated with it. Mm-hmm. Did you complain and say, I don't want to do this, this isn't fun? Or did you just buckle down and just do it?
Yeah, just do it.
In your
just
case,
go on it.
You just did it, okay?
Right.
So for those students, we don't need to build things up. But for the other students, I gave that whiny voice because that's how I felt. Because I didn't want to do this nonsense. I couldn't. I just decided I was going to go through it. But a lot of students have collapsed as people. And while they may be perceived as being whiners, which is another thing I constantly hear about dyslexics from teachers, they're not whining to be whiners. They're whining because you're asking them to do an unnatural thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, I will tell the teachers, I'll tell you what, here's something you absolutely should be able to read according to any senior professor. If you can't, how about this? We'll take away your graduate degree. If you can't do the next one, we'll take away your college degree and you'll be flipping burgers at McDonald's. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they can't do it. I'll say, well, go ahead and do it. Well, I can't. Well, what are you, stupid? Do it. And then they got to feel for a very small amount of time what it was like for us to go through school.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And they're just like, that was so horrible. And I said, we go through worse when we're 7 or 8. You're a grown person. Mm. So when we're dealing with that, that's why the original process I showed you how to take from writing a bunch of randomly placed misspelled words to writing basic sentences is to show the dyslexic student that we can do this. Okay. And then we progress that along until they're in high school. And I love doing this. I'll say, do you have an older brother or sister or younger one that's in advanced placement English? That's like our A levels in the States. And they'll usually say yes. And I said, how would you like to do an essay better than they can? And they're like, we can't. I said, the purpose of an essay is your teacher wants to learn something original.
Yes.
Okay. And that's where I would go through, like what I gave you example with Shakespeare. And we'll say, here's the process we go through. And the teacher goes, I didn't realize that universal theme applied to that particular character and scene. Okay, I've learned a little something.
Yeah, yeah.
And what is their older brother or sister going to do? They're going to write Romeo and Juliet is a tragic story about teenage love. Some variation of that.
Yeah.
And the same essay has been written by top students for the last 100, 200 years. And they come back and they'll say, how did you do this? How did you beat me? And then even when I teach that process to the AP kids, almost none of them go anywhere near as deep as the dyslexic. And the professors and the teachers want you to go deep.
Yes.
And then they can start seeing the advantage of being dyslexic. Like, so for example, that program I was telling you, my original program, how long do you think it took me to get that approved by Dr. Collins?
I don't know. I'm going to say 3 to 4 years.
Less than 2 weeks.
Oh, I was wrong on that assumption.
Yeah. Why? I entered a business plan competition. Top prize was $25,000. Second prize was $15,000. I had to have his approval before I could put in the application. I just didn't have the time, so I just went and did it. And people kept looking at me and say, you essentially did your dissertation in under 2 weeks. I said, well, yeah, I didn't have time. And they didn't grasp that I was so used to having to do major advances in a short amount. So this will ring well with a lot of your listeners. Mm-hmm. I want you to think back when you were in school. Mm-hmm. Starting sometime in elementary school. Did you ever find you were in a situation where you had to perform some academic task at a minimum level before you could move on to the next grade level, but if nobody could help you with it, if you couldn't do it, you were going to be held back. So then you got really frustrated. You came up with a solution and you moved on. And that has happened to you multiple times throughout your school days. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So what I tell, let's take a look at the other student. valedictorian, top of their class at Oxford or Cambridge, and now you're entering a PhD program. They've never failed. For them, a failure is getting a B. I mean, it's like an end of life thing for these students. Yeah. And then here we are. We have to constantly get frustrated. The frustration causes the epiphany when we're looking at, I just have to advance. I don't want to be held back and not be with my friends anymore. Okay. That's happened to us so many times. Now we reach graduate school. We're in something very narrow and they say, come up with something that matters. Well, you've been doing this since you were 7 or 8. Yeah. Okay. So that's the advantage of dyslexia. And what I try to tell the people I work with, you want to become valuable enough to your organization if you're going through a traditional college and at least a master's degree, where you can have access to an administrative assistant. Mm-hmm. Okay. So by coming up with solutions that matter, like one student I worked with, he said he worked with first couple of days in the job, he came up with a solution that saved his company about $1 million. And he said, I want access to an administrative assistant. They said, okay, you can share one. Well, nowadays we have this thing called Chat GPT-4. Mm-hmm. Wow. I spend $22 a month. My work with editors has dropped by over 90%. I only use the best, most senior editors when I'm publishing a curriculum now. I used to have to get an editor for every email I wrote. Mm-hmm. Not anymore. So this thing has literally saved my life for a huge amount. And for people that are in very strict professionals, like accountants and lawyers, they just came out with an enterprise version. I'm not getting paid a cent to say this, is just what I use, where you can have your information secure for a little bit more than that. And it just allows you to be far more productive.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot going on with AI recently.
Yes, but for dyslexics, now I can go and, like, for example, one of my employees, she said she had a better idea for one of my curriculums, and she's just entering her master's degree. And I said, okay. So I sat down with the artificial intelligence for about 9 hours, and I drafted out an 88,000-word book based on a paragraph she sent me. Mm-hmm. And I said, go play with this. We're going to test this out on a number of students. But go ahead. And she said, this is going to take me months to go through. I said, sure. But I did it in less than 9 hours. And that's going to make one of her programs substantially better after she figures out everything. Okay.
Yeah, gets the kinks out.
There's a lot of kinks to work out. But I took what she had, I moved it around, expanded it, contracted it, had to come up with an outline. And I said, okay, write on that outline. Mm-hmm. And then I sent it to her, and she said, there's a lot of good ideas there, but that's just an example. I use AI all the time for solving a lot of problems. So my former students will come to me and say, what about this? Okay, here's how we talk to AI. One of the key things that I found is after I tell it what I'm looking for, I'll ask it to rewrite what I said in my own words to make sure it knows exactly what I'm looking for, and then I'll let it loose.
Yeah.
That's a key thing. If you're working with AI, ask it to rewrite in its own words what you said, make sure it's correct, and then let it run loose. And it's there. Yeah. Well, it's there to do a lot of the grunt work, academic or professional grunt work. But you have to check everything. I'm not sure if you know about the lawyers in America who wrote a brief to a judge and AI made up all the cases.
Yes, I did hear about that one. Yeah.
They were in a lot of trouble.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, that's abusing the technology, isn't it? That's misappropriation.
Oh, absolutely. So, it's there to do your grunt work. Do a first draft, but then you have to go from that draft.
But that's quite a good little hack, actually, that you tell it to write back to you, say back to you what it thinks you are asking, and to check that that's the two of you agree. It's quite a nice little kind of trick with it.
Well, specifically here it is. I'll say, if you agree with what I said, please say yes, and then rewrite it in your own words.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I say it almost always, it'll agree, and then it'll say it and it'll rewrite it. And then as it goes and does it, I will then have to go and check each point. But when I was working, for my employee, I just said, it gave me a really big outline. I said, okay, can we break this part into 5 parts? Because dyslexics need clear instruction.
Yep.
And then I would just ask you to go and write each of those sections. Now, at that point, there's a lot of review that needs to be done. I'm not doing that. That's what my employee's for.
Yes.
So, but she's going through and finding out what's good, what's bad, chucking out probably most of it, but there's a few good ideas in there.
Yeah, fair enough.
But the fact is, I got that original one, that paragraph, I expanded it 88,000 words in less than 9 hours. And that's something I could never imagine doing without this sort of thing.
No, definitely not. Okay. So each guest that comes on the podcast gets asked 3 rapid fire questions from me. They don't necessarily need quick answers from you. So let's dive into question number 1. What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
The prejudice is that we do not belong in professional employment. So we absolutely belong in professional employment. It's just a matter of using our advantages and taking what we're not good at, like writing. I use the artificial intelligence to draft things out. I have editors when I have to have things finally done. Have somebody else do that sort of work for you and focus on what you're good at.
Yeah, definitely. That is great. That is a great prejudice proved wrong that dyslexics definitely do deserve and belong in professional employment. Okay, now question number 2 of this rapid fire set. If an alien landed, you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
I would tell them that dyslexia is primarily an organizational problem because if you look at the front part of our brain, it deals with word analysis followed by articulation, that we think so quickly. What we need to do is to force our brain to organize itself by using writing as a measurable output. Yeah. And as we go with our struggles from the most basic sentence to coming up with ideas for a doctoral dissertation, once we do that, we are able to think so quickly and so precisely that we can find innovative solutions to complex problems far better than most of our general education peers.
Yes. Okay, cool. And the final question is rapid fire set, and you're not allowed to promote your own program for the answer to this one. Seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
My favorite dyslexia life hack is I like what you came up with when you were talking about how do I spell this word, just going to Siri.
Yes.
In a more modern version, it's going to ChatGPT because I spend the $22.
Yeah.
Okay? I go there and I'll say, explain this to me, have a conversation. To me, it's kind of like, do you ever watch Star Trek?
A little bit.
There was an episode with Dwight Schultz where he was talking to the computer, where something took over his brain. He became a genius very quickly. And what I learned there is the ability to talk to the machine, to work things out. And that's what I find that ChatGPT 4 does. It's worth the $22 a month to have that, because it's far better than $3.50 to go through that, to learn things, to work things out. And it just makes things so much easier. That's probably the best hack that I can say.
Before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a link to our page. And what it allows you to do is, if you're interested, we have webinars where we discuss the various programs that we discussed here. Mm-hmm. If you're interested, we take $1,000 off our retail price. Okay. And you can sign up for a 90-minute meeting with me where we'll go through your concerns with dyslexia. Okay. And I can say, this is how we can help you solve it.
Sure. I'll post that at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. You better find a link to this episode there. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Russell, for taking the time to talk with me this evening, all the way from the United States. And I hope people get a lot out of conversation and what the techniques that you teach are.
Well, thanks for having me, and I hope a lot of people will enjoy some of these hacks and just make their life easier and not go through all the issues I had to go through.
Definitely. That's the name of the game, isn't it? I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.